think the real task is not going to be getting distracted by you or reading all of the books. You're so over it. At least if I get green lipstick on my teeth in this video, it will be festive. Hi guys, it's Leanne and we are here today for a very spooky book haul. I have not only been participating all month long in the horror version of #BookBuddyAthon, where I have been reading exclusively spooky books, predominantly, haunted house books. But I have also been acquiring spooky books. I do this every year. I go in with a huge horror TBR that I get most of the way through, and I come out with the brand new horror TBR, which it will probably take me until next October to get through. It's a kind of cosmic balance, if you will. So I have here a nice combination of very traditionally Leanne books with, ghosts and... Can I say haunted houses again in this video, or are you just going to click off? I'm going to say it anyway because it's my favourite thing. Haunted houses. But there's also some mind-bending horror in here. Some psychological horror for your nerves. Let us get in to the grimness of October together. Because have you never seen a horror movie bitch is not going anywhere on her own? Not even to the bathroom late at night. Ask lovely wife Helen. I'm not joking. First up, I have a book that I admit I have already read. That doesn't happen often in my book hauls. Usually I'm so excited to show you guys that they just stay in a pile on my floor until it's time to film, but this one was too delicious. And it also replaced one of the books from my BookBuddyAthon TBR, which was not delicious. In fact, it was quite rancid. More on that at the end of the month. Like, undoubtedly a lot more, because I got a lot to say about that book. So this one is Thornhill by Pam Smye, and I heard about this on the wonderful April from Getting Hooga With It's channel. She was singing its praises, saying how incredibly creepy it was, so I was like, well, that is a me book and I shall purchase it immediately. It's also really trying hard to smack me in the face because it's an incredibly chunky and heavy book. And that is because this is not just a haunted house horror novel, it is also a graphic novel, and it looks like this. Thornhill flits between the present day and the 1980s. We begin in the 1980s with diary entries and we're not entirely sure who the person writing them is. We just know that she is a young girl and she lives in a care home with a lot of other young girls who she doesn't necessarily get along with. Then in the present day we get the illustration portion of this novel, which is about Ella, who is moving into a brand new home in a brand new city. She has recently lost her mum. Her dad is a single parent and he's not doing very well at being there for her all of the time, so she has a lot of time on her hands, which means that she ends up staring at the lot behind her house, which is the ruins of Thornhill. I will undoubtedly tell you guys more about this in my tops and bottoms for the month, because this absolutely blew me away. I finished it in just a couple of hours. I couldn't put it down. And it's also very seasonally appropriate. It's very spooky. Next up, I'm going to talk about two books pretty much back to back because they come with a really nice story. For the last year, I've been having some medical stuff which has been not very much fun at all. And I was recently waiting for a hospital appointment for a procedure which I was really not looking forward to. And the lovely Rosie from Sparkle's books was just absolutely brilliant. She told me about her experience of this procedure. She was there to be like informative and hand-holding along with many other lovely friends. As a thank you for that, I sent Rosie the Confession by Jessie Burton, which I had purchased a few days earlier and was very interested in, to say thank you for being such a wonderful friend. And at the same time, she purchased for me The Grip of It from my wish list to say well done for being brave at my appointment. And I just think it's a nice example of what BookTube can do. Like, here's a buddy read that we're going to be doing, and here's a haunted house book, and somehow both of them have tied into making a really lovely friendship, and it's all because we were talking about creepy haunted house books in the first place. It's just me being sentimental about the book community. Let's go on and talk about these. Let's start with The Grip of It, because this is another shocker haunted house novel. This one is about Julie and James. I mean, okay, those names were a choice. And they are moving to a new house, but not voluntarily. They are moving to get away from James's somewhat complicated, shall we say, past. They bought this house, which I think has like a mountain behind it and a lake in front of it, and it's very rural and pretty and stuff, as a fixer-upper and a way to take their mind off of everything that James had done and the weird choice that Julie had made to stay with him. But as they start renovating, the architecture in the house starts to change every day, and mould pops up in corners that didn't have it before. And when Julie interacts with it, when she removes it, it changes from mould to bruises with the same pattern on her body. Julie and James then realise that this is not going to be an episode of like The House in the Sun, and that they're going to have to do some investigating to find out what kind of shit show they have ended up with. And then we have the confession by Jessie Burton. So I also have a confession. I hated The Miniaturist by Jessie Burton. I absolutely hated it. It was meandering and long, and the premise of it was not actually what the novel delivered, which is one of my most irritating things. And then I skipped the muse because I wasn't interested in the premise of it, and also I was still kind of salty about The Miniaturist. But then when this one popped up, I was like, ah, because I liked Jessie Burton's writing, just not her plotting. And I also hated the fact that The Miniaturist took place solely as historical fiction, and I felt like her tone suited much more a contemporary novel. We are following Rose Simmons 3 decades after the main events of this novel, when she is trying to find her mother who disappeared when she was just a baby. Her research leads her to LA. Not my favourite place to read about in novels, but we're going to go with it. Rose travels to reclusive novelist Constance Holden's house because she has been told that Constance was the last person to see her mother, and in fact she was the one who kind of quietly led her to LA in the first place. And then when she actually meets Constance, she receives the confession. I'm hoping that there's more of a chance that this is actually going to contain a confession and the story that it promises on the back, as opposed to The Miniaturist, which promised a story revolving around a creepy miniature dollhouse and just gave me a snooze fest of a creepy romance instead. The next one I've got is a very different kind of creepy novel, and I spotted it on Jean from Jean's Bookish Thoughts' this channel. She was talking about creepy books that she had recently loved, and as soon as I heard the premise, it's like, I'm having that. Especially because the cover looks like this. This is Little Eyes by Samantha Schweblin, and as you can see on the front, these are little boxes with little panda toys in them and like price tags. And then on the back, in this world, which is just a little bit in front of our future, these little toys exist, and they're kind of somewhere between a toy and a pet. You buy them, you place them in your house, and they will interact with you independently like a pet would, except with more intelligence. But the weird creepy twist is that anybody, literally anybody, can pay to control these little animal toys that exist in your house. Somebody completely around the world and in a very different age range from you or your children can pay to pilot this toy, which means that they can see what you're doing at any time, wherever the toy is, whenever they choose, which is just so screwed up. So I want to read about it. Also, as a final note, this is another one which is very, very manageable if you want to like cram it in at the end of your October TBR, because this one is under 250 pages. Speaking of things that are under 250 pages, we have You Should Have Left by Daniel Kelman, which I didn't realise was this tiny when I bought it. This one comes in at just over 100 pages. I think it's fair to say it's more a novella than a novel. This one is translated from the German. It's set in Germany, where a screenwriter and his young family go and hire a house in the mountains so that he can finish his second screenplay in peace and quiet. Except when they get there, something's just not right. Even as distracted as he is by writing, he seems to find that the rooms are not in the places that he left them last time. And every time he goes back to his journal, he sees words in it that he doesn't remember writing. Does this one sound familiar to you? Because to me, it sounds a lot like the plot of The Shining, except kind of the length that The Shining should have been. Next up, we have a completely different kind of horror. This is fantasy horror, and I think It is also safe to say that it is a book that I have been completely sleeping on. This is Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir, and unlike the other books that I have just held up, this one is a lot longer. This is about Gideon, who is thoroughly over her life of servitude, and she has decided that, as the blurb says, she is going to pack up herself, her sword and her dirty magazines and make a daring escape. But unfortunately, Gideon's escape plans don't quite go the way that she wanted them to, because elsewhere there is Harrowhawk, daughter of the Ninth House and Bone Witch extraordinaire, and she needs to borrow that sword and Gideon in order to get what she really wants. But as the end of the blurb says, some things are better left dead. This is apparently hilarious, horrifying and hella sexy, so I'm there for all of those things. Next up we have another YA horror, and this one does deal with ghosts again, but in a very different way. This is The Ghost Bride by Yang Zi-Chu. It is set in 1980s Malaya, when Britain was most definitely still the colonial reigning power, but where traditions were still very, very at the root of the society. This one follows Li Lan, who comes from a very genteel upper class household, but a household that has recently lost all of its money and is about to lose its social standing. She receives an offer of marriage in a very unusual way. You see, her suitor is very, very much dead. His family want her to marry his ghost in order to placate his restless spirit. This would be the perfect thing for Li Lan's family. She would get her social standing back, but she doesn't know if she wants to offer up her entire life to what she thinks is probably not even really a ghost. This one also promises that there is a romance story in there somewhere, but I don't think it's between Li Lan and the ghost that she's meant to marry. So I'm very intrigued about this one, and apparently, according to this, it was a Netflix Mandarin series, so maybe there is more amazing subtitled Netflix content out there for me. Now, these next two books do come with a little bit of a spoiler warning for my tops and bottoms for this month, because they are the next two books in a completed series that I started during Book Buddy-a-thon. They were in fact my Book Buddy-a-thon pick to buddy read. They are The Dead and The Fear by Charlie Higson, which are the sequels to The Enemy. In The Enemy, we meet a group of kids who have been holed up after what is essentially an apocalypse in an abandoned Waitrose. They have made fortifications and they're living off of what's left of the food in the supermarket. They don't have very much contact with the outside world except when they go on supply runs to try to get more food and necessary things like medicines. All of the adults were changed by an illness. And that's all I'm going to say, because of course these are a kind of a take on a zombie novel, but they're not really a zombie novel. It's a very different take. It's a take that I haven't seen before and I really, really love it. So these kids are desperately clinging to life and somebody turns up on their doorstep who shouldn't necessarily have managed to be alive for as long as he has, and he tells them that there is actually a place where everything is a bit better. To get to that place, they are going to have to cross London, and so they team up with some kids who are also in an abandoned supermarket, but a Morrison's this time. There's some class stuff going on there for the people in the UK. I am sorry, I need to know what happens immediately. Speaking of a book that I've been hearing about for a long time, I finally picked up The 13th Tale by Diane Setterfield. The reason I've waited so long is because every time I went to pick this up, it was the TV tie-in edition and I didn't want it, and I'm vain. I'm a vain book hoarder and I'm okay with that. The thing that really tipped me over the edge into just clicking buy it right freaking now, right now, send it to my door, was that the wonderful Victoria from What Victoria Read recently read and absolutely consumed this, stayed up past her bedtime, which for any of you who knows Victoria knows that's a very odd thing. Any book that can make Victoria stay up past 9 PM is a book that I think I want to read. Welcome to Leanne's House of Shade, where mostly we shade our friends. This one is about an old abandoned house called Angelfield. Angelfield used to be a dazzling country house, and in that way it's kind of giving me like The Little Stranger by Sarah Waters vibes. Angelfield tried tried its best to contain the March family, who were all very twisted and enigmatic in their own ways. And now, years and years later, Margaret Leah, who I think might be a writer herself, I'm not sure, is investigating Angelfield House. She wants to completely unpick the mystery of the March family and their strange connection to another enigmatic person, another shadowy, reclusive figure, Vida Winter, who is an author who has all sorts of weird connections with the house, and also apparently has weird connections with Margaret and her own shady past. And you know how I do this thing, guys, where whenever a book comes into my house I read the first couple of pages of it. Sometimes that's dangerous because sometimes I then just end up reading on and abandoning the books that I was in the middle of. When this one came into the house, I picked it up to read the first couple of pages and literally the first sentence was, "It was November." And I decided that that was enough for me to fall in love with it. Next up, we have Something. That could just actually be enough for the whole synopsis of this all on its own. It is something. It's called The Earthlings by Sayaka Murata, who is also the amazing, amazing mind that came up with The Convenience Store Woman, which I read not that long ago when I confessed to you guys that I was terrified of short books and I was determined I was going to read all of my short books, and then I pretty much read that one and stopped because it was good. Let's not break the streak. And Earthlings, despite having the cutest cover in the world, is not a cute book. In fact, very much like Convenience Store Woman, Earthlings has a very strange premise. And I'm just going to read it to you because I honestly don't think that I can do any more justice than the synopsis, and also the synopsis does not contain everything which is in this novel. Let's just read it together. Natsuki isn't like other girls. Together with her cousin Yu, she spends her summers in the wild Nagani Mountains, hoping a spaceship will take her home. When a terrible sequence of events threatens to part the cousins forever, they make a promise: survive no matter what. Now Natsuki is grown. She lives quietly in an asexual marriage, pretending to be normal, hiding the horrors of her childhood from her family and friends. But dark shadows from Natsuki's past are pursuing her. Fleeing the suburbs for the mountains of Nagoni, Natsuki prepares herself for a reunion with Yu. Will he still remember their promise? And will he help her keep it? It sounds quirky and weird in the same way that her first novel was quirky and weird, except in this one there are apparently trigger warnings for everything. I don't know all of them because I haven't read it, so I can't tell you them here, but I encourage you, if you're thinking about picking this one up, you go and look at some of the other reviews for it on BookTube or on Goodreads, because there are some very screwed up themes in here. But I'm very excited because I loved the twistedness of Convenience Store Woman. I loved how it was just very calm until it very much wasn't. Next up is a book that I feel really bad about. I don't feel bad about the book, but I feel bad about the fact that some lovely person sent it to me from my wish list and I've lost the slip of paper somewhere to tell me who it was. So if this was you, I am very, very sorry. I do thank everybody who sends me books from my wish list on Instagram, so I will have said thank you at some point, but I like to also be able to tell you where books came from when I do hauls. If this was you, then thank you so very much. This is White for Witching by Helen Oyemi. This will also be the first Helen Oyemi book that I have ever read, although I have owned a few of them, and over time when I didn't get to them, I did the thing that you do as a book lover and I passed them on to other book lovers who have ended up absolutely loving them and raving about them to me. So every time I've kind of gone, well, I'm glad that you liked the book, but also like maybe I should have read the book first. White is for Witching is one of those little haunting books that keeps popping up on people's spooky TBRs, and eventually I just gave in and was like, okay, I'm gonna have to check this one out. This one is about a lot of things, so let me see if I can get it all right. This is about a house which is on the cliffs near Dover, and it has housed many, many generations of women, but it has never ever completely let any of them go. Miranda Silvers now lives in that house and she is still shaken by the shock of the death of her mother, and she is trying to find meaning and a way to go on. But this house on these cliffs is a very strange house. Fruit grows out of season, doors appear out of nowhere, and there are whispers all the time. And right at the start of this novel, in fact, the very first sentence says, "Where is Miranda?" Because she has started to literally and metaphorically disappear, and her twin brother Elliot and her best friend are trying to track her down. Second from last, we have a book that has one of my favourite subgenres of my favourite subgenre. So in all of horror, haunted house books are clearly my favourite. I've said it 100 times in this video already. If I say it anymore, you're probably going to turn me off forever. But inside that subgenre, there is the subgenre of houses which are not old but are instead very, very new. Houses that are not old, the houses that are instead very, very new, that have never had any dead bodies in them and so should never have anything wrong with them. And in The Invited, that is exactly the problem. So Helen and Nate have purchased a plot of land in a beautiful, picturesque, small, historic town, and they are going to build the house of their absolute dreams. This is what they've wanted for their entire life. They're pouring everything into this project. Helen is a history teacher and she wants to incorporate different pieces of history into her house. So old beams from old places around the town. There's like bricks that have come from a mill, tiles that have come from an old farmhouse. And in doing so, Helen uncovers the history of a very, very sad local woman whose death was a very strange thing. But as Helen starts to get drawn into the story of this woman and her descendants who still live in the town, she discovers that maybe there's a little bit more in history than meets the eye, and maybe she has invited it into her brand new house. Unfortunately, this one's like 400 pages, so I'm definitely not getting it read before the end of this month, but it's going to be soon, my pretties, so soon. And finally, just to round things off, we have a middle grade. This is Small Spaces by Catherine Arden. I love it when people start a middle grade or a YA and they're like, well, I wasn't expecting it to be that creepy because it's a middle grade or it's a YA, and then it absolutely blows their socks off. Because there doesn't need to be gore all over the pages for things to be really creepy, right? This one is about Ollie, and Ollie is on a very fun school trip to a neighbouring farm. They're learning all about how the farm works and how the pumpkin picking works and how the scarecrows keep nasty things away from the crops. And then they receive a message, and the message says, "At night, they will come for the rest of you." And very quickly, Ollie realises that she and her friends are going to have to solve a 100-year-old mystery, or their entire class is very much going to die. Not going to leave the farm. None of them are going to leave the farm. So that's it. Those were all of my spooky October buys. There was just no way I was ever going to get out of October without doing a book haul. So now it's your turn. Tell me what you have read and what you have picked up in October, especially if you have read a haunted house novel that you've never heard me mention, because I am always looking for good new ones. It doesn't have to be a house. I'll take a haunted everything. Up to a car. I don't want it. Who cares about cars? Up to cars, I will take a haunted anything. And that's it for me and for Mr. Grissom until we get my tops and bottoms, where I tell you what I liked out of all of the spooky books that I picked up this month. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe for more of my face and more of this little goober, and I will speak to all of you soon. Bye! You're just over me, aren't you? You're just completely over my crap.
I love you. Please don't leave me.